All right, hello everyone. What I'd like to do in this video, it's still a few weeks before Pesach, so instead of getting into the nitty gritty of the Haggadah, I want to share something a little more broad, something that will hopefully, give us some insight into the whole experience of Pesach and to stimulate our thinking, get us thinking about the topics of the Exodus and leaving Egypt and the Seder and all those important things that are coming up. So what I'm going to say is it's sort of from two different commentators. I'm going to borrow a little bit from each and put them together, and I think we'll have a nice approach to this topic. It's based on a comment from the Maharsha, one of the great Talmudic commentators on the tractate Brachos and Dalet Amud Beis, and also from the Vilna Gaon, a comment that appears at the beginning of his Haggadah. I'm fairly certain he didn't write this Haggadah, but they put together some of his ideas on the Haggadah. So on Halach Ma'anya, which if you remember from last year, is the strange Aramaic passage at the beginning of the Haggadah. So there's a lot of problems with it, and the commentators really struggle to figure out what's going on in that passage. So the Vilna Gaon also has an approach to it, and we'll borrow some of what he said. So I think if we put this together, some of the Maharsha, some of the Vilna Gaon, we'll have a very nice approach to understanding one of the major themes of the Haggadah. So if you, they have this thing, I don't know much about this, but there's something called these recurring numbers in nature. There's some number sequence that you find all over throughout nature. So if we were to try to identify the recurring number sequence in the Haggadah, so there'd actually be a few contenders, which number it is, but I think probably the clear winner would be the number 4. All right, the number 4 is sort of the central number of the Haggadah. It just reappears over and over again. And I'll give you some examples of this. It's not an exhaustive list. But, of course, there's the 4 cups of wine. There's the 4 sons. There's the 4 languages of redemption. All right, we talk about the 4 Lashonos of Geula, which are sort of synonyms on some level. We'll see that they don't mean exactly the same thing, but the Torah uses 4 words to describe that Hashem, that God is going to redeem the Jews from Egypt. It says, V'hotzesi, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. All right, and one of the standard explanations for the 4 cups of wine is that they parallel these 4 languages of redemption, the 4 words that are used for redemption. Just a few other examples. There's a statement, we're not entirely sure the origins, but you'll hear this spoken about a lot around this time of year, that the Jews were redeemed in the merit of 4 things. That they didn't change their clothing, right? They didn't assimilate into Egyptian culture with their clothing. They didn't change their names, so they used Semitic, they used Jewish names as opposed to Egyptian names. Again, they didn't assimilate. They didn't reveal secrets, right? They didn't speak a Lashon Hara. This is one of the things when one of the Jews tells on Moshe, gossips about him. So Moshe says, now I understand why this slavery happened. So we see that the slavery was because of gossip. So the fact that I guess most of the Jews, or most of the time, they didn't gossip meant that was one of the reasons they were saved. And they didn't abandon the practice of bris milah, of circumcision. All right, so again, there's these 4 things, and one of our most important number 4s in the song at the end of the Seder, we identified the who knows 4 is the 4 matriarchs, right? The 4 matriarchs of the Jewish people. So there's some discussion that maybe the 4 matriarchs parallel these 4 reasons that the Jews were redeemed. Each of the mothers had taught us one trait. So either way, that list suffices to show that the number 4 is very, very central to the Seder. All right, so what I want to try to understand right now is what is the significance of 4. Why is it so important to what we're going to do on the Seder night and to celebrating Pesach? So the Gemara in Brachos, so this is what the Maharsha and the Vilna Gaon connect this, they make this connection. The Gemara says something which at the surface seems totally unrelated to Pesach. And that is, the Gemara says that there are 4 people who have an obligation to thank God. We call this a hagomel. It's a blessing that we make, right? If you're familiar with it, sometimes when you go to shul, after someone gets an aliyah, they'll make a blessing of hagomel. So a hagomel is someone wants to express their gratitude to God. So according to the Talmud, there are 4 categories of people who have to express their thanks to God. Again, so far this is unrelated to the Seder. This is just a law in the laws of brachot. And this is based on a passage in Tehillim in the chapter 107, all right, where he talks about 4 different people who have to thank God for having survived some very dangerous situation. And the 4 people are someone who crosses the desert. So that would be a very dangerous situation. If they survive it, then they have to thank God. They have to make hagomel. Someone who crosses the ocean. They go on a boat in the ocean. So again, that would be a life-threatening situation. Someone who had a health scare, someone who was ill and got better. Again, this would have to be, a sort of life-threatening, a very serious illness, something where, something more than just a cold. And someone who was redeemed from prison. So they were in prison, they were redeemed. And again, this would have to be something more serious that, not just that they got drunk and they spent the night in prison. All right, so those are the 4 categories that the Talmud identifies based on Tehillim 107, which talks about those 4, that those are the 4 dangerous categories that somebody has to thank God that they were redeemed and make hagomel. Now, there is a very fundamental debate which is relevant for the halacha of hagomel, and that is, are these 4 categories just telling us examples, but it really means any life-threatening situation? In other words, you can use these 4 categories to extrapolate to other situations which are life-threatening, or are the 4 categories exhaustive? In other words, is it these 4 categories have to make a bracha, but then not other situations that are life-threatening? So basically, this is a big debate in the halachic literature in the medieval period, and basically nowadays it's a debate between Ashkenazi and Sephardic practice. Sephardim understand these 4 categories to be, for the most part, these 4 categories. Other things which are life-threatening are not included, whereas Ashkenazim hold that they're just examples, but we include other categories where someone was in a dangerous situation and they survived. So that's just in terms of the practical halacha, and one of the most famous, probably modern day discussions of this issue is an airplane, right? An airplane is obviously not discussed in the Talmud. They didn't have air travel, but so the question is it similar to going on a boat? Some people say only if the plane went over the water, then you make hagomel. Is it a situation that's a potential threat to one's life? So there's all sorts of discussion about this. So that's the technical issue. But either way, whether it's just an example or whether it's exhaustive, either way, the Talmud does identify from Tehillim these 4 categories of people who were in life-threatening situations who need to express their gratitude to God for having redeemed them. So again, you'll notice, of course, the number 4. And the Marsha and the Vilna Gaon also noticed that, and they said, well, light went off in their heads, and they said, great, this is certainly connected to the Seder. So the way they connect this is very nice, and I'm going to go to the Vilna Gaon's explanation of this. What are the 4 categories? All right, so the Vilna Gaon says something, and the best example that I can really use for this is, Abraham Maslow, a contemporary or, a last generation psychologist. So he had a very famous idea of the hierarchy of needs, and he had this whole list. You can find it, he had a whole chart, a graph of what people's basic needs are, and then you move up from the basic needs, and you can continue to develop. But if your basic needs are not met, so then you're not really able to progress to higher stages of needs for meaning and things like that. So there's the basic needs. There's this hierarchy of needs that a person has to be able to meet the bottom needs, and then they can keep moving up the chain. So it's like the food, the food pyramid or something for needs. Okay, so the Vilna Gaon, again, I would compare this. He has a sort of similar idea, his hierarchy of needs, and no one should be surprised to find out that he identifies 4 basic needs. All right, the Vilna Gaon says that at the basic level, so to speak, is people need food. When someone is lacking food, so then that's a form of suffering. That's a terrible form of suffering. They're lacking their basic nutrition. Their basic needs are not met. They don't have food and water and things like that. Then somebody needs what he calls, or what I'll translate as peace of mind. All right, that's the second need. If someone is lacking peace of mind, so then they're also not able to process, to enjoy their food properly. Even if they have food, they can't eat it. The Hebrew word that he uses is sevia, right, to be satisfied. The Torah, when it talks about the obligation to bench, so it talks about v'achalta, you shall eat, v'savata, and you will be satisfied. So there's two different things. There's eating, but in addition to that, there's satisfaction, that when you eat and you're satisfied, you're able to enjoy the food and to process it through your body, and the body's able to use it properly. I'll give my own example. The Vilna Gaon doesn't use this, but you have certain people who struggle with eating disorders. So they might have the fanciest spread in front of them, the most gourmet meal in front of them, but they can't eat it. Their mind, they're unable to eat it. They can't. Their eating disorder won't let them enjoy what they have. So you have some people who struggle from starvation. That's a terrible, terrible affliction. They don't have the food they need. But the other people have all the access to the food they want, but they're not able to eat it. So the Vilna Gaon says that with peace of mind, and that could be with anything. It's not just an eating disorder. That's just my example. But anything that a person is missing, right, that they're not able to relax and eat and enjoy the things that they have, the physical things that they have. So that's the second lack. The third lack, says the Vilna Gaon, is the lack of a home, the lack of a place to be settled, to be rooted, the lack of a place to, of shelter. That's the third lack. And the fourth lack, says the Vilna Gaon, is the lack of freedom. Right? You might have, someone could have food, and they could have peace of mind, and they could have a home, but they might not have freedom to spend their time the way they want, to live the way they want. So that's also, right, someone in prison, let's say. Many prisons in this country, you have all those things. You have food, you might have even peace of mind, you have a place to live, but you don't have the freedom to decide and to choose how you're going to live your life. So that would be the fourth need. All right. So again, it's food, peace of mind, to enjoy the food, to enjoy the blessings we have, a home to be settled in, and the freedom to make our own life choices. Now, says the Vilna Gaon that if you look back at the four categories of people who have to thank God for being saved, they parallel these four needs. All right. This is a very interesting suggestion. He says that the affliction of illness, when someone is ill, so they can't eat properly, they can't meet their nutritional needs. The Rambam talks a lot about this, that a sign of illness is not having an appetite, right? When you're ill, you can't really, your body either can't take the food or you don't have an appetite. Whatever it is, illness is a lack of nutrition, of being able to meet your basic physical needs. So that would be the equivalent of a lack of food. The crossing the ocean. So he quotes that the Gemara talks about the people crossing the ocean are unsettled, right? When you're in a boat and you're on the waves, you have seasickness, so you're unsettled. So there might be food in the boat, but that would be the parallel of being unsettled, not having the peace of mind of being able to eat the food. Not having a home would be the parallel of being in the desert, right? Someone wandering through the desert is the epitome of not having a home. They're not able to settle down in the desert. And the last one is the most obvious one. The being in prison is the lack of freedom. All right, so the four people who, according to the Gemara, according to the laws of brachos, have to thank God for saving them, who make the Hagomel, are the four people who were saved from being unable to meet their practical needs. All right, they were not able to have food and to process it, to eat it properly, and to live in a home and to have freedom. So once they're saved from that situation, they thank God for that. Now, the Marsha says that this is connected to Pesach. This is exactly what we are thanking God for on Pesach, that we were saved from these four lacks, these four deficiencies. We were missing these four things in Egypt. And he actually says it's the other way, that if you look in the Tehillim, it talks about these people being saved from enemies. So what enemy is there in the desert? What enemy is there in crossing the ocean? So the Marsha says that it actually sort of works the other way, that where did Tehillim learn the four categories of Hagomel, right? Where did the halacha learn that there's 4 categories that you have to thank Hashem for saving you from? We learned it from Jewish history, from the story of Egypt. Right? In Egypt, we were lacking these 4 things, and Hashem saved us. So therefore, we learned that these are the 4 categories that a person needs to thank Hashem for saving them. So this is a very fascinating idea. I think it really, it helps us frame the story of Egypt. And the way I would put this is, we often think, I think what we tend to think about the story of Egypt as a very one-dimensional story, right? We were slaves, and God redeemed us. God saved us. So now we're free. So we thank God for freeing us. But what these commentators are pointing out is that there's really a multi-dimensional aspect to the freedom of Egypt, that it wasn't just that we were slaves, but there were other aspects to our lives in Egypt that we were missing. We were missing nutrients, we were missing peace of mind, we were missing a home to be settled in, which was solved not immediately when they left Egypt, but when God took them to Israel. So it began the process of going to Israel, which is our homeland. So either way, there's this multi-dimensional process to the redemption from Egypt, which is what we're celebrating on Pesach. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about how there was both a physical redemption and a spiritual redemption, but they're saying something even more, that even within the physical redemption, there was sort of a multi-dimensional redemption that happened in Egypt. There were 4 elements of our slavery, 4 things we suffered from. And when we left Egypt, when God took us out of Egypt and freed us from Egypt, we were saved from all 4 of those types of suffering. And that's why the number 4, according to this approach, is so crucial to the Seder, because it highlights that it's not just 1 or 2 things that we're thanking God for redeeming us from, but we're thanking Him for having saved us from 4 things. It's like a super duper 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 hagomel all on the same night. A person gets ill and gets better, so they make a hagomel, and it's a big deal. Right? Someone gets out of a dangerous situation in prison, so they make hagomel, and it's a very emotional thing. The Seder night is like 4 hagomels in one night, because we were saved from all of these things, so we make the hagomel on each of them. So I think this is a very, it's a nice way to think of the Seder as this super duper hagomel, and it just adds a lot of depth to what we're going to be doing on the Seder night. Now, because I've sort of borrowed a little bit from each of these commentators, so I want to try to fit it into the 4 languages of Geula, right, which are v'hotzesi, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. And I'm gonna sort of propose my own based on how we put this together, because the Maharsha puts together the framework, and we borrowed the Vilna Gaon's ideas, his underlying concepts. So I'm gonna try to use these ideas and put it together. But the hotzesi means that God took us out. So I think that's that God removed us from the lack of a peace. All right. In other words, we didn't have peace of mind, and God took us out from there. All right. Vihitzalti is that God saved us. So I think that would be that He gave us our basic needs, right? That now we were not able to meet our basic needs in Egypt, and now we are able to. Viga'alti is that God redeemed us. So I think that would be our freedom. And v'lakachti, I think that one's the easiest, that God took us out, that God will, that He took us with the connotation of that we're going home. Okay, I think you can fit it in. There might be other ways to possibly fit it into those 4, but based on those 4, but that's why we have the 4 cups. Each of those cups sort of celebrates another aspect of this redemption. Now, let me end with one comment that the Vilna Gaon makes, which I think is a very useful comment. This is in his commentary on Halach Ma'anya, and if you look in the Halach Ma'anya, so he points this out, and it fits very beautifully. But the Halach Ma'anya, I'll read you a little bit of it. We invite Kol dichvin yesi v'yechol, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Kol ditzrich yesi v'yifsach, whoever is needy, let him come and celebrate. Hashata halcha l'shana haba b'Ardi Yisrael. Now we are here. Next year may we be in the land of Israel. Hashata avdi l'shana haba b'nei chorin. Now we are slaves. Next year may we be free men. So the Vilna Gaon points out that these are exactly the 4 categories that he just identified. Right? We say whoever's hungry, let him come and eat. That's hunger, if you don't have your basic needs. Whoever is needy, right? That's the needs, meaning if you don't have your peace of mind, whoever is unable to enjoy their blessings. Right? Now we are here. Next year, may we be in the land of Israel is a reference to home, right? We're not in our home. Next year, we hope to be in our home. And now we are slaves. Next year, may we be free men is a reference to freedom. So those 4 categories are literally introduced at the beginning of the Seder. In the Halach Ma'anya, we identify hunger, need, home, and freedom as the 4 categories that are going to guide the Seder. So it's a very nice reading. But what he suggests here, and this is the major problem that many commentators deal with, which is what are we really celebrating on the Seder night in the year 2021? Right? What are we celebrating? We're in exile again. What are we celebrating that God took us out of Egypt when now we're back in exile? And the problem is even more compounded. It's a bigger problem when you think about what was a Jew celebrating in 1941 when they celebrated their Seder in Nazi Germany? What are they celebrating? That God freed us from Egypt thousands of years ago, when now these Jews were stuck in Nazi Germany in hell. Right? You have all these unbelievably moving stories about the Jews who celebrated Seders in concentration camps. What are they celebrating when they're back in the ultimate exile and hell and their lives are being killed left and right? What are Jews celebrating in those situations? So the standard answer that the commentators give, and the Vilna Gaon also takes this approach, is that we're celebrating our optimism, our belief in the future. In other words, the Seder tells us that God saved us once and he can do it again. Right? The belief after the exile, after the freedom from Egypt, the Exodus, is that God did it once and he's going to do it again. He promised our ancestors that he would free them from Egypt. He promised Abraham that he would free his descendants from Egypt, and he did. He lived up to his promise. And he promised us that he'll save us, and we believe with a full heart that he's going to do it again. So that's what we're celebrating. No matter how difficult it is, no matter how bad it looks, but that we're celebrating that we know that we believe that God's going to redeem us. But the Vilna Gaon adds something very nice according to this approach. He says that if you look in the Halach Ma'anya, of the 4 needs, of the 4 things that were lacking in Egypt, the Halach Ma'anya points out that only 2 of them are currently lacking. In other words, we living our lives in exile, we have food. We have peace of mind to be able to eat our food. What we're missing is our homeland and our freedom from exile. But in the Halach Ma'anya, it's very clear that anyone who's hungry, come and eat because we have food. Anyone who's needy, come because we can help you enjoy, we can help you eat that food. What we're missing still is being in the land of Israel, and we hope next year we'll be able to correct that. And we're missing our full freedom, and we hope to be able to correct that. But the Vilna Gaon says that one of the things we're saying in Halach Ma'anya is don't think we didn't gain anything from the Exodus. We did. Of the 4 things that we're missing in Egypt, we're only missing 2 now. So we've moved up in the world. Even though we're in exile, but it's a less difficult exile because we're only missing 2 of the original 4 things that we're missing in Egypt. So that's why it's part of our hope. That's why we're able to celebrate the Seder, because not only do we have this hope and this belief and optimism that we're going to be redeemed again, but already we have been partially redeemed because we're not in as bad a situation as we were in Egypt. So that's how the Halach Ma'anya is really the introduction to what's going to come in the Magid, because in the Halach Ma'anya we introduce those 4 categories that we're going to spend the rest of the night thanking God for saving us from. And then we point out that we're ahead of where we were in Egypt, so that's why we can celebrate even though we're in the exile. And that leads us to the understanding that we have firm belief and faith that God is going to redeem us again in the future.